Lunchtime Live with Colton and Brandon. So last time we talked, we do this monthly as we mentioned. Our previous theme was AI productivity, how we use it kind of on the daily, and systems and tools that are currently out and available. I thought that went really well. We have a lot of great questions and stuff like that. So as we go through this, feel free to throw out some questions, or if you actually want to raise your hand and say something, we would love to have that as well. The theme for today is when is AI going to get good? I kind of think it's already good, but obviously it's going to get better. So what's the reality of slow AI development and progression into society, into business, into everything, really? And then maybe even some of the features that we've heard of, or maybe down the road or whatever. So we're going to go through a few of these things and talk about those. I'm over the sales team here at Zibtech, and so the stuff that I talk about pertains mostly to the sales or business side. Colton is over technology, and so he is the director of client success, and so he'll talk more of the technology. So to get into it, I actually want to talk a little bit about the originality, because it's like I still read a lot of stuff about people who are concerned about how this is going to take over. Is it going to take my jobs and stuff? And we've discussed that and hit on those points in the past. But really, when you look at it in terms of originality, AI at this point, and a lot of these points that I definitely the ones I have could be argued. So I may say something and you might argue with that or differ in opinion. This is not necessarily my opinion, it's what I'm seeing in the space, right? It's what people are talking about or whatever. So it definitely right now, AI lacks originality in creativity, in emotional intelligence, the contextual understanding. Like, we've grown up all our lives learning about context and where we are in society or as a person or in this group or that group. AI really doesn't have that context other than what it reads about or what it surmises from publications and stuff like that. It certainly doesn't have common sense or the ability to adapt within a situation. Ethics is probably going to be a big one that we talk about, and other things like self-awareness and human connection. So those things, it's definitely missing in originality. In theory and practice, that's a big one, because there's a huge gap with applicability. Like, how do we standardize this? There's a lot. So I've read a lot of things like, here's what AI could do, kind of the Jetsons, right? It's like, we've seen either through movies or books, fantasy novels, whatever, what we think AI could do. But then there's what's actually theory and what's actually practical, and that could change. From today, we could say one thing, and in even 2 to 5 years, it could be a completely different landscape. So that's one that's kind of up in the air as well. And then also how to standardize that. Where does that puzzle piece fit in the entire scope of things? The next one that I think is important is the diversity and dynamism. So dynamism for me is how you act on that, how you actually put that into play and make that productive. The real world scenarios that I'm seeing right now are diverse. So you could look at business and you could say, well, how do I apply AI to my business? And so I'm on the phone a lot with people, with a lot of businesses, and I've actually asked them that question. And you get a lot of different answers. You can also look up a lot of applications that are being built, and you can kind of just see, if you search into it, you're going to find a ton of information on how people are starting to apply this in unique ways, ways that even as some of the founders of AI have suggested they didn't even realize, they don't. They know what they created it for, but there's new applications all the time. So real world scenarios are super important. AI has to compete with human expectations. So what is our current expectation of what AI can do? And I think a lot of that I've seen come out in like fear. That's like, seems to be the number one thing people ask me when I talk to them about it, like, is it going to take over? Actually, one of my answers was, well, if it takes all of the jobs that exist, who cares, right? Because now nobody has to work. Our food just arrives, and things happen, and we're transported to places we want. I don't know, maybe that's wrong, but if it does all of our jobs for us, and when we talked about that in the past, but really the expectation of what is our expectation versus what it will be able to do. The next one, let's see, is demonstrate its value and impact. Actually, I'm going to go back to the social and cultural value. So there's some issues with that because different contexts exist in different communities. So not just industries, but also how different people in different communities are going to use it, right? The access to that type of thing. So obviously it's going to take longer to come about just based on your social situation, your economic situation. Obviously businesses are going to be able to dive right into it, start building applications, and the possibilities are endless, I think. But just like the internet, it took years and years for mass population, what do they call that? There's a word for it.
Adaptability.
Yeah, mass adoption. So I think that's going to take a long time for that to happen. So that's probably the number one thing that causes that sluggishness is, people just don't have access to it. Another thing is the ethics of it. I think people are really kind of concerned, like, is this something that we should do? Should we really venture down this path to AI, and what are the social implications? It's got to be trusted for one, and I think it goes back to originality. Like, and people could argue this. So, is AI going to take over the world, right? Well, we don't know for sure. Hopefully not. But I don't really know that it has the creativity to actually do that or want to do that, and it doesn't have preferences and stuff like that. It might have ideas and things, but that's on a huge scale. On a very granular level, we need to trust that when we go into now, if you look at Microsoft Edge and Bing, I've been using that a lot. It's a free version. You can go in and you can do create, so you can create images and stuff like that. Excuse me, but one thing I found is some of the searches and some of the prompts that I do really don't lend themselves to actual facts, and sometimes it lies. So it's like super confident about what it's saying, but it's like it's not true. And so the one thing I like about Bing is it actually has references. So if it says something and it gives you an answer, oftentimes it'll give you a reference so you can go back in and double check so you can make sure. And that's going to help us. Number one, it's going to help us train the AI better, but it's also going to help us become more it's going to become more trustworthy to us. Also, the transparency, accountability. Does it align with human values? A lot of that stuff we need to know is actually going to come about, and we'll find ways to ensure that security for people. Also, is it going to discriminate? Is it going to manipulate? Or is it going to have misuse? So a lot of those things are questions that people currently have. When it comes to business, leaders actually have to trust this so that they can implement it into their companies, right? But also the employee has to accept it in terms of, is there a curiosity toward it? Is there a flexibility and ability to learn and to go out and get those skills? Because right now, it's just kind of a cluster. Everybody's like, what can I do, and how can I make money, and how can I put my expertise towards this? And I've found lots of ways that even I could do that, and within the sales industry, there's lots of ways to do that. But people are going to have to be willing up front to kind of maybe not be compensated for that, to have that curiosity and go out and gather up those skills. And then obviously the leaders need some sort of clear vision or goal, because it's not really going to work if we don't have a clear path towards what we want, or what we want it to do, or how we could apply our employees to that. So those are some important facts. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
I know you've got your points as well, so I don't want to.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There's so many, like there's all the things that you talk about with like is it good to use AI? Where does it take you in the future? All of those things. I know in a lot of our current, in our past conversations that we've had, have been talking about like the possibilities of AI and how it can be used and where it should be used and all those things. We have spoken about AI a lot. What we kind of wanted to do today, right, is talk about kind of like the negative side of AI in a way, or even more like the reality of, well, how do you, as a company, how do you build your own AI tool, or how do you use your AI tool? Like, what's the realities of actually developing AI, and what goes into that, right? So Brandon kind of hit on the business side of it. I try to kind of connect that with the business side onto the actual, doing of the development and actually building the AI, and what goes into that, the actual building of it, and then also what goes into the realistic sense of building that, right? So if we talk about, let's say, I'm sure every business, every stakeholder is probably looking at their own business or service or employees and thinking, should we use AI? Where can we use AI? How would we do it? All those items. And I think a lot of people probably a little bit blissfully think maybe in a way that, hey, we could throw AI into one of our tools, especially, if you're a normal, if you're the average person that uses the internet every day, probably has several different applications, installed on their computer, or, as web plugins, you'll probably see that one, if not, many or all of those applications that you use are promoting some sort of AI tool or feature development that they're plugging in, right? Those range all the way from, Brandon had mentioned, like Bing has pretty much AI, like Chat GPT built into it in a way now, which for a company like Microsoft is realistic, since Microsoft backs OpenAI, and they're in a way kind of a partner with OpenAI, so they obviously have access to like one of the biggest and best models out there. They also have access to endless amounts of data, with having a search system. So there's that kind of that end of the spectrum. And then on our last call, we talked about some of the tools I use. One of them, for example, is Loom. They do like just a simple little, they name your video for you based off the content of the video. Sometimes that can be AI. Maybe it's just an illusion of AI. Maybe all they do is just use a transcript to grab the first few keywords out of, your first sentence or two, and then plug that in. Not really AI, more just grabbing a transcript and plugging it in. And that right. And for someone like Loom, right, that was probably a very smart investment, because it's probably cost them a couple $1,000. For a larger company too, maybe even $10,000, $20,000. Maybe they created a little model, took some data in, cleaned it up, trained it, and now it's able to give pretty solid titles for the video. The nice thing about their situation too is they're giving you a suggestion for a title of a video. It doesn't need to be great or accurate. It's just kind of a suggestion. It's a nice, hey, it made my video for me. Cool. I don't need to anymore. But if it's wrong, you can change it. It's not a big deal. A lot of companies that I've spoken to, and recently want to build these AI models or building these AI features to solve some of like their business functions. And a lot of the times for some of those business functions, right, it has to be accurate. Like you can't say, hey, it's a, it's a title and let's hope it works. And if not, it's not a big deal. If you're saying you want to have some sort of an analysis happening, or you want to replace, an employee or replace a function of an employee to, maybe save them some time. A lot of the time that has to be very accurate. So you kind of have, you have a lot of options really, but kind of the key options that you have, right, is either taking something out of the box. OpenAI has an API. You can use these pre-built models and tools. They obviously are going to cost you as you go. That's a quick way that you can just plug it in, train it a little bit, work with it, configure it, and have it go. And if that's something that you're going to use at like a low bandwidth, that's probably going to work great for you. On the higher end of it, maybe you want to go build your own model and build your own AI solution. At that point, maybe you would have to set up your own server. Could be a cloud server. Maybe you want to set up like an on-prem server. At that point, right, you have to get the right kind of chip to handle all of these functions that you need. So like NVIDIA, for example, they're pretty much the leader of these GPUs and these chips that you got to buy for these AI tools and servers. Really like the main one that they use, that they sell, that you're going to want to put on your server, those GPUs can run around about $10,000. So that's not the whole server, that's just the GPU. So you got a pretty good upfront cost for that. The analysis, some analysts have estimated that ChatGPT 3 would cost roughly $4 million if you wanted to go make that yourself today. So a pretty big investment. And there's a lot that goes into it, right? So kind of getting into that, the first thing that I always kind of go over with clients is the cost benefit analysis. So again, as I spoke, maybe you're going to replace an employee, or you want to increase the productivity of an employee. You really have to have some way of measuring what's that value gain that you're getting out of that, if you're trying to use it as a function for like your internal use, right? So let's just say, put it out simply, you want to replace employee B that serves these 4 functions, and you really think, hey, I think we can build an AI tool that can do that person's job and take care of that person. Well, first thing you got to do is make sure, how much are you paying that person? Let's just say maybe $50,000 a year. So that's kind of your cost of that employee. You obviously hopefully have a pretty good idea of what the benefit of that employee brings, what functions they serve, what value that brings to your organization. So you kind of have that set aside. Now, when you move into building an AI solution to replace that, really getting into building that, there's a lot of things to consider there, right? So first and foremost, the complexity of AI development. AI development is very complex. It's new, it's complex, it's hard to measure. There's a lot that goes into it. So first and foremost, you're probably taking on a problem that you're not very aware of. You hear a lot about AI, and I think everyone's pretty aware of AI and all these different tools, but getting into the nitty gritty of it, very, very few people really truly understand AI development. Next is data collection and preparation. Some of that knowledge that you have for that employee, for them to do their job, you may not have an ideal way of collecting that data or preparing that data to put into the AI model to train it, right? So that's a big one that you have to be able to consider. You have to be able to get the data, you have to be able to feed it into the model, and you have to make sure that data is good and clean, right? You can't just grab any data and throw it in there. You have to have good data, clean data that actually represents the information that you need to give to the server to train it. The next is testing and validation. So kind of going back into clean data. Not only do you need to give it good data, but you actually need some component in your organization to validate that data, right? So the AI is only as smart as you kind of allow it to be or help it to be, right? So there's a possibility that your AI may be giving out incorrect results, and without giving it the proper validation and testing, it will train itself in the wrong direction, right? Or train itself incorrectly. So you do still need someone, either as a service that you've hired to do this, or internally to validate those results to make sure that it's being trained correctly and kind of heading in the right direction. Another big one is resource constraints. AI development's new. So there's not a lot of people out there that truly know what they're doing when it comes to building AI and building these models. And the other thing is it's blowing up. So the people that do know what they're talking about, do know what they're doing, are few and far between, and can definitely cost you an arm and a leg. The hard part with that as well is maybe you only need to pay one of these experts up front to build the model. Maybe you don't need to pay them to maintain it and train it. You might be able to have some cross training going on, but again, that falls into who do you have within your organization? Do you have someone with a skill set that can take over, tweaking and training this model, or this expert that you have to bring on to build the model? Is that someone you have to keep on board for a long period of time? Because at the end of the day, if you're paying an AI developer, $150,000 a year to replace someone's job that costs you $50,000 a year, that obviously doesn't make a lot of sense. So obviously, there's a million factors that come into play as far as your volume. Maybe you're replacing 10 employees that you're paying $50,000 a year on purpose, and then maybe it does make sense. There's a lot of things that go into it. The other really big difficult part I think I've seen when it comes to developing AI is really the scope creep and continuous improvement. So the scope creep is a big one in the sense that it's hard to determine, hey, the AI tool is done and it works. Like what is finished when you're building an AI tool, right? Like, is ChatGPT finished? Like, people use it every day and people love it. Or are they done? Can they be done? Do they need to continue to add to it and train it? Like that, they will because of the position that they're in. But I think that's the hard kind of pill for people to swallow is, hey, this model is done. We're done training it. It's good to go. We can shift focus and we can just let it do its thing, or are we going to continue to work on it? And that's kind of the case with all software. I mean, it's pretty rare you're going to see somebody build software and then just be done. Right? Like, have a development team working on a piece of software, you ship it, and then no one touches it again. No one works on it again. That's pretty rare. So one, it's hard for your organization to determine that and really build out an efficient cost-benefit analysis, but also, do you want to? Do you want to stop that, right? So it's hard for you to train. And then also, lastly, on that point is, if you're going to hire someone to do it, that's another big one that we've seen is, as I've talked to some clients and some professionals in the space, having that clear determination of how much is it going to cost me to build this, and what's that, yes, this is delivered, right? Does it do X, Y, and Z? Yes, it does. Is it 100% accurate? Probably not. So are we supposed to pay that? Is this complete? Is this shippable? Those terms are hard to negotiate. And I think it's a very important thing to make sure that you're both very much on the same page. If you do like a third-party service, or if you're paying somebody to do it, I think that can be a gray area. And it's always going to be a little bit of a gray area, but I think that's really important to make sure that you don't get into something with an unknown delivery or goal at the end, or finish line. Really, at the end of the day, though, to summarize, really from my side, building out all these AI tools, I think if you're a large company, you've got the capital, you've got the technical expertise within your organization, and you've really got the large enough amount of data to make sense for you to build it internally, that it may make sense. But I think for a lot of people, a lot of organizations, it does make sense to just use an existing model and configure it for yourself. There is actually I saw an article earlier this week that talked about one of the big adopters of AI early on was this AI dungeon game. And they got really popular. People really loved it. It's one of those like dungeon crawler games. It's like text-based, but it uses AI, right? Instead of somebody writing, right? I don't remember when it was. It might have been like the 80s or the 70s or 80s, those text-based, role-playing games. Those almost seem like AI, but really what it was is just some crazy guys, developers that just wrote out this huge decision tree that's just like hundreds of thousands of decisions. These guys took AI and turned it into one of those dungeon games, but they used AI to build the prompts and create these decision trees and move it along. It was really awesome. People loved it. But as it got more and more popular, they were getting like millions of prompts a month that this AI tool is having to build and train and work off of. the guys didn't do the cost benefit analysis quite enough, or didn't plan it out quite enough. They actually got to a point because they were using OpenAI. They didn't plan it out quite well enough to where they're actually losing money. They were spending over $200,000 a month just to run that server. Not their employees, not the server up for just general traffic or bandwidth or anything. It was just the actual model was costing them over $200,000 a month to handle all those requests. So luckily those guys were in a position, they were able to adapt and switch to a different model and do a few other things to bring their costs down. But that's something that they had to do that they weren't ready for. So I think looking into companies like that, seeing where other people have kind of fallen into these pitfalls. Luckily, there's some of these pioneers like these guys, these AI dungeon guys, that have gone through it and kind of figured it out. They're out there as case studies. But I think that's, it takes a lot of research. It's new and growing. Every day we find out something new. So I think it sounds really awesome and fun, but I would say before you invest any money, I would definitely invest a lot of time to make sure it's something that makes sense for your organization.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, ultimately, the investors have to be on board because that's what's going to push this whole thing forward is money, and then businesses will have liquidity to be able to go and apply that. Something that we've done just to kind of, because we're kind of, and I was going to check on, see if we have any questions as well. But just to kind of wrap this up, something that we've done here at Ziptech, so we do custom software services. We have a team currently in Bangalore, India. And for years, we've hired different teams, mostly developers and engineers. But recently, we've gone out into the market and we've talked to different companies. And what we're finding is there's a concern for rising labor costs. And so one way that we've kind of combated that is we've made a little bit of a pivot in our business model. And so in addition to custom software, so you could actually build a team, our internal team use us to build whatever application, web, mobile application you need. But you could also come over here, and because we've gotten really good at building not only data teams, but HR teams and accounting teams and sales teams, we thought, hey, we're really good at this. We might as well give that as an offering to other companies and help them do that. And the reason for that is it's really hard for you to go to, say, India and create a business because number one, you don't know how to do that. Let's say you're trying to create a private limited company there. There's so much red tape and regulations and things that you don't know. You need someone there. We actually have a partner, his name's Raja, who is over there and he oversees the operations. And so we've been able to do that. So we could actually build a team for you, and it could be mix and match. Maybe you want, I don't know, an entire sales team, or maybe you want someone in HR and accounting. We could actually help you build those teams for a very reasonable cost. So what we've done with the AI is actually implemented our searches. So we have what we call AI Builder, and we'll go in and we'll use our AI technology to help find those teams. So that's one way we've pivoted, and then also used AI and technology to improve that process.
Yeah. And with that, we're talking about the cost, right? I think a lot of people don't realize the cost it takes just to run a server, right? The hardware costs of those things. So one of the big costs, right, is obviously the resource that knows how to build it and how that works, but also the hardware costs. So one of the things that we've found is when these people come to us and want to build an AI model or an AI tool, it may be difficult for them to afford all of it across the board. So one of the easy ways to cut cost is finding someone overseas, right? So no matter what, the hardware cost is going to cost the same, no matter where you put it, right? So that's kind of a fixed cost. One of the variable costs that you can really work with is your labor cost, right? So instead of finding somebody, over in the US that maybe costs, and the range is crazy right now, right? Somebody might say that they've got experience with it and they know what they're doing. It might cost you anywhere from like $1 to $200,000. But we've seen a lot of different listings for people that I think are experts and know what they're doing and can really build this model and take you through all the steps, but they're gonna, they're upwards of $300,000 to $400,000 a year. Whereas you can get similar talent to that over in somewhere like India, where we have our base of operations over there for engineering. And they could be more in the range of like 50 to 100,000 a year, so same amount of knowledge and talent just for a fraction of the cost. I know we'll go over time a little bit, but we got a couple questions in. One of the questions was, how can we strike a balance between embracing AI advancements and maintaining personal privacy and data security? One of the big things to always look into is if you're going to use an open AI tool, they will always have policies. Some of them will actually tell you, hey, make sure you don't share public information or private information, because this is just going into like a public pool of data. So be wary of that. Some of them will actually make sure to notate that your information is never shared. So that might be a safe option. But yeah, I mean, there's a balance between allowing AI to help us do work, and then how much information are we giving it to help us along. It's almost like giving access and permissions to services like on your phone or your computer, right? Like if I want my phone to suggest a new restaurant opening up near me, I got to let my phone know where I live, and it's like, that's kind of up to the individual user at that point, is what do you want? So I think at the end of the day, your organization, you can make those decisions, but anyone interacting with your AI tool, you need to be able to grant that permission to them, or clearly let them know what information they're giving away, so it's not misleading. Anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a great answer. That pretty much covers it.
Okay. He threw in a couple more. As AI systems become more advanced, how can industries prepare their workforce to adapt to new job requirements and skill sets? I think workforce to adapt to new requirements. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as it becomes more popular and some of these tools will start to integrate AI, there's going to be more and more resources out there to learn to use these different models, right? And how to work with them. So if you build AI within your organization, you need to train people within your organization how to work with that AI tool, right? We've seen tools that are built that you just have a clear yes or no affirmation to the response, right? So if you're looking for, let's just say, I have an AI tool that's telling me how much something costs, right? And so it does a search and it comes back and says, oh, this item should cost X or Y. You need to have an option and train your employees to not just say yes all the time, or not just say no all the time, but actually have clear guidelines on how to use that tool. I know nowadays there's already people teaching people how to configure AI tools, right, for prompts. So that's something that, again, if your workforce is going to be using any of these AI tools, it would be important to teach them how to use these prompts.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is personality based. So you're going to have people in companies that are kind of old school. They don't want to get into the new technologies, and so they're going to take longer. And they may have an entire workforce that wants to get into that and is very interested in that, but they're going to throw up roadblocks toward making that happen. So it's going to have a lot to do with the mindset of the companies and that overall vision, what they think AI can or should do.
Yeah,
ethically.
Exactly. And then last question before we wrap it up here. How did this company AI done cut costs? Did they move away from AI? So they didn't move away from AI. They continue to use it. What they did was they just moved to a different language software that was cheaper, that was offered by a startup. I think it was AI 21 Labs as the startup that they shifted to. And they also switched to some open source and free language models. So basically they kept AI, they just found cheaper and more open source models. I think really at the end of the day, as they became more and more familiar with it, they weren't so reliant on this end-to-end product that was offered by OpenAI. They were able to do a little bit of development on their side, piece together some open source models and some cheaper models. And in the article that I had read, it looked like it brought their costs down to under 100,000. So they cut their costs by over half by just kind of piecemealing things together and kind of getting their hands dirty instead of relying on a third-party service for everything end to end. Awesome. Well, I would take, if you have any more questions, please send them over. We can get them answered either via email or in our next call, but we are already over. So we will call it a day. And our next topic probably won't be AI, but it might be. We'll see. It's ever changing. So
Something to do with technology.
That's gonna be technology based, that's for sure.
Awesome. Thanks for showing up. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.